Hello, welcome to this webinar where we will be discussing enhanced recipes in GP Pro EX. This is in fact not new, but rather an update and a refresh on the enhanced recipe functionality within GP Pro. Here's our agenda for this webinar. I'm going to get into the structure of enhanced recipes. We're going to look at what enhanced recipes look like in the editor, meaning in GP Pro EX, and what they look like in the runtime in the HMI. We're also looking at how the enhanced recipes can be imported and exported as CSV files. And then finally, we'll just do a walkthrough of enhanced recipes in GP Pro itself. So basically all HMI models and WinGP, which is the Windows runtime for GP Pro, support enhanced recipes. So of course there are differences in functionality based on some hardware and software limitations depending on the hardware. Okay, so when we discuss enhanced recipes, one thing we should understand is that GP Pro EX itself has different methods to uh, handle recipes. There's at least 3 different methods that come to mind in this webinar, and a lot of those, and those were like I show here in this slide. So some of those are legacy functions that are still supported. In this webinar, in this discussion, we're focusing on enhanced recipes, which was the latest addition to GP Pro recipes functionality. Here's the enhanced recipe data flow. This is just, again, just taking screen captures from the manual. So what we have is we have our display unit with its internal memory, and we have equipment, and then we have say the devices that we're connected to or the memory areas that we're concerned with, etc. And in the first case, we are transferring enhanced recipe data between the internal memory of the display and the device PLC, and we can actually go both ways as the arrow indicates. So we can have a recipe and then bring the PLC data into that recipe live, so to speak. Okay. And then number 2, you can take this data that is saved as enhanced recipes and read or write, basically import or export that to external storage as CSV files. So kind of a busy slide. So there's a lot of points that I want to make about uh, enhanced recipes here. Um, so when we're talking about creating enhanced recipe data in GP Pro and transferring this data to the device PLC, so we've got some main points. So we have recipe groups, and individual recipes are created in the GP Pro editor. So there's a space in the editor where you create and make your recipes. Your enhanced recipes are actually transferred. It has separate items in the transfer tool. So if you need to check this box down here in order to transfer your enhanced recipes with your project data. Interestingly enough, enhanced recipes do not consume non-volatile RAM. They actually use the project flash memory. And then the recipes can be fully edited in the runtime. They can be searched and sorted in the runtime, except in some basic HMI models. Recipe data can actually be mapped to internal memory, which allows us to use standard screen objects to say if we wanted to edit the individual recipe elements outside of the normal editing objects. We can now do it with screen objects. The recipe data in the editor and the runtime can be saved as CSV files. The CSV files can be exported, for example, edited, and then imported in to change the recipes. Okay. And then a final note on this slide is because this element of transferring the enhanced recipe data is separate from the rest of the project, we have to take care that when we are transferring the project, if we have made any changes in the runtime to the PLC data, we want to make sure that we uncheck this box so we don't overwrite the existing recipe structures or the recipes that had been created or edited. Okay. Okay, so moving on, so just looking at this is the structure of the enhanced recipe data. Basically what happens is you have a recipe group, you have the actual recipe, and then you have the elements of the recipe. So like we show here, the recipe group contains the actual recipes, and then the actual recipes contain the elements within each recipe, and we're calling those, that's essentially the ingredients. And you can see how that breaks down here. So this is one recipe group. Within this recipe group, I can have multiple recipes. I believe the limit is 1,000 or something along those lines, depending on how big the recipe actually is, for example. And then over on this side, this is within this, so this is recipe number 3. Each recipe can have different elements if you'd like, but this is recipe number 3, and then it has these different ingredients. And then, of course, for recipe number 3, the ingredients would have perhaps different values for each one of these things depending on the recipe. Okay, so creating and transferring enhanced recipe data, right? So when we're talking about, we have a couple of different ways that we can do it. We can do a manual transfer via the touch screen and the screen objects, which is kind of what we're showing here. And then so what we do here is step 1 is we select the desired recipe from the list, and then we say, do we want to transfer to or from the device PLC, right? So we're saying from the GP, which is the HMI, to the PLC, or the other way around, from the PLC to the GP. And then we also have the ability to use system variables so you can programmatically transfer recipes without any interaction from the user if you would like. Okay, so moving on. So when we look at the enhanced recipe list and the enhanced recipe data list, these are the screen objects that the users use to interact with the recipes in the HMI. The enhanced recipe list is listing out the recipe labels in the specified recipe group. So the recipe labels are essentially the recipe names. You can use this list for 3 different functions. You can transfer the enhanced recipe data, of course. You can edit the recipe labels, the names of the recipes, and you can perform search and sorting on the recipe labels. Okay. In the enhanced recipe data list, this is the list that populates with the different ingredients. So when you select a specific recipe, their enhanced recipe data list will then populate with the ingredients in their values. And then if you allow it, you can edit these individual elements through the touchscreen, and then you can see you can save it to the recipe in the touchscreen here. Okay. Last topic is about importing and exporting enhanced recipe data. You can export recipe groups to CSV files. You can also import enhanced recipe groups from a CSV file to overwrite the current recipe groups in the HMI. And then, of course, you can import or export enhanced recipe groups on both the GP Pro EX editor and the HMI unit. Okay, which means you can update the recipe group settings in the CSV file and import them into GP Pro EX or into the HMI unit itself. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll take a live look in GP Pro EX editor, and we'll walk through an established project, and we'll walk through how that looks in the programming area, and then how you actually operate it in the runtime to see how that flow actually looks like. Okay, so here we are in our GP Pro EX editing environment, and you can see here that I have my screen open, but we're going to go back to that in a minute. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead and take a look at the recipes in the GP Pro EX environment. Like I said before, for these videos, these videos are assuming you know a little bit about how to navigate around in GP Pro. So you see what I've done is I've gone to the main project window, and then you can see here that under my enhanced recipe settings that I have created 3 different enhanced recipe groups. I've created breads, cookies, and cakes. And very important, and what you need to do now is, when I say it's very important, is once you start navigating within this environment, it's very important to just pay attention to which group you are editing, etc., because sometimes you can maybe get your groups crossed. Just speaking from experience. So anyway, so you can see here I've opened up this breads group, and what you can see is, you just take a very quick look at it. you can see that up here I have my different recipes for the different breads. But of course, here in the different elements, this is of course fixed per group. So the elements of the recipe group are fixed. So all the recipes share all these same elements and then also share of course, the PLC address that is associated with them. And then also you can see here, if you look through this table, you could say this editable column is telling you whether in the runtime you can change the value or not. So you could basically say that you can't, it's going to be fixed only in the editor. Here you can use an input control, so you can put a range on that. Here is, and then here's the mapping if you'd like to do that. And then the way that you populate this table is basically as you click on the different recipes here at the top, it populates them here down in the ingredient table, and then you can of course go in and change the values. If you want to have multiple recipes open in the table at the same time, you just simply hold down the shift key, for example, and then you can see here I can select multiple recipes at the same time, and then I can of course come in here and make changes to those just by typing in the changes. Okay, and then if you go through here, if you double click on cookies, and of course you bring up all the different cookies, and then you can of course populate, and you have this exact same scheme but across different groups. Okay, so then if we go ahead, if we go back to the screen that I've created to manage my recipes, you can see what I've done here is I have this is the enhanced recipe list. Okay, so this is telling me, this is where I'm picking this is showing me the group. And you'll see it'll make more sense when we get into in the runtime how this is behaving. So again, so this is the enhanced recipe list. This is listing out the different recipes from the group. This is the list. This is the enhanced recipe data list. So this is the list where we see all the ingredients and their values based on the recipe that we've selected. Over here on the right hand side, I have a little drop down box that allows you to pick which recipe group you want to deal with. And then down here you could see I have arrows to navigate through these lists. I have a reload, we have a save. So this is very important. If you make changes in the runtime to the editor, you have the save button. You also have a copy button, so you can basically copy and paste uh, recipes. The edit button will allow you to make a change to the name of a recipe, and then the delete button will allow you to delete a recipe. I also have this little button here where I can go to a import export page. So if we go ahead real quick and take a look at what that looks like, you can see here again, I'm going to select what recipe group I'm working with. Here, this is the system variable. It tells us how the recipes are processing. And then I have an import or an export and an import button. And then I have a little picture of this is a screenshot from the manual showing you the timing of how the importing and exporting works. And I have it set to import and export to and from a USB memory stick. Okay. So let's look at what that looks like. I'm just going to go ahead and run this in simulation. Everything works in simulation the same way it'll work in your HMI. So you can see the first thing that comes up, you can see it's pre-selected the breads recipe group. So for example, if I want to change that to cookies, I'll just come in here in my list, get cookies, and say load. And now you can see that it's loaded the cookies group. If I click on one of those, you can see that it populates the recipe elements down here. Let's go back to breads because I believe that's the group I put some values into. Go back to breads. Then we pick, for example, this top recipe. You can see here's my ingredients with their values. And if I want to, here, let me just clear these out so you can see the simulator is remembering values. So let me just clear those out of the PLC. And then I'm going to go ahead and write that to the PLC like that, and you can see it moved, so it took those recipe values like that. And then for example, if let's say if I want to make a change, if I make a change in the PLC and then I want that PLC change to be reflected in the recipe, then I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that recipe into here, and you can see it made the change. And now I'm going to go ahead and save the recipe. So now when I reopen that recipe, you can see the change is made. Okay. Up here with the copy, so for example, if I wanted to make a copy of this recipe, if I hit the copy button, you can see it creates a name. It just appends the tilde with a 1 on the end. If I want to change that name, I can simply come in here and just change the name. Press enter, and now I have a new recipe. And these are just arrow buttons to navigate through, etc. Okay. If I go switch real quick just to the import export screen, you could see, for example, I've got the breads. I'm going to go ahead and say export that. Nothing too dramatic. You can kind of see what happens here in the recipe processing. You could happens real quick, to a USB stick. Then I have this little button in here to clear that out. And then of course I can do the same thing, import. The status is changed as I'm doing the importing. The importing is done, and then I clear it out like that. And then this is just a back to the main page button. Okay. So hopefully this was a good overview for the enhanced recipes functionality in GP Pro EX. Feel free to leave any questions in the chat, and also if you have any suggestions for future topics that you would like us to cover, please let us know. Thank you.